The message arrived on a frequency no one used anymore. It was old tech, pre-warp, the kind of signal that took years to cross the void between stars. By the time it reached the edge of human space, it had been traveling for nearly a decade. Most colonies ignored it. Background noise. Cosmic static. But on the research station orbiting Kepler 442b, a young communications officer named Mara Chen heard something different. She heard crying. At first, she thought it was interference. A glitch in the decryption algorithm. But when she isolated the audio and cleaned it up, the sound became unmistakable. It was a child. Sobbing. Begging in a language the translation matrix barely recognized. Mara's hands trembled as she ran the signal through every filter she had. Slowly the message took shape, not words at first but images. Grainy. Distorted. But clear enough. Burning villages. Bodies in the streets. Small figures, too small, being dragged onto transport ships. And then silence. The transmission ended with a single phrase, repeated over and over in broken galactic standard. Please. Someone. Help us. Mara sat in the dim glow of her monitors, her breath caught in her throat. She had heard stories about the Galactic Council. The sprawling alliance of species that governed the stars with endless committees and diplomatic protocols. Humanity had been invited to join only recently, cautiously, reluctantly, like letting a wild animal into a house of glass. The council preached peace, unity, the rule of law. But as Mara traced the origin of the message, she realized something terrible. The council already knew. The species called themselves the Ethlin, gentle beings. Artists, philosophers, dreamers. Their worlds were covered in gardens and libraries, and their culture had no word for weapon. They had joined the Galactic Council centuries ago, believing in the promise of protection and shared peace. They were wrong. The Kravix Empire had come without warning. A militaristic power on the outer rim, they had been raiding Ethlin colonies for months. The Council's response was predictable. Sanctions, stern warnings, emergency sessions that went nowhere. Meanwhile, Ethlin children were being taken, sold, killed. The latest report, buried deep in a council subcommittee file, estimated casualties in the millions. And still the council debated. Mara forwarded the message to her superiors. Then to Earth. Then to anyone who would listen. She expected outrage. Immediate action. Instead she got silence. For 3 days nothing happened. And then everything did. The first response came from a place no one expected. The human colony on New Galway. A farming world on the edge of the frontier, known for whiskey and stubbornness. Their planetary governor, a grizzled woman named Kira Holt, stood in front of a camera and spoke for less than 2 minutes. We've seen the message, she said. Her voice was calm, steady. We've seen what's happening to the Ethlin. And we've seen the council do nothing. She paused just long enough for the weight to settle. So we will. Within hours, New Galway's defense fleet, a ragtag collection of converted freighters and aging patrol ships, began moving toward Ethlin space. They weren't soldiers. Most of them were farmers, miners, engineers. But they had children of their own. And they remembered what it felt like to be helpless. The movement spread like wildfire. New Taipei, Aurora Station, the Belt colonies. One by one human worlds and fleets began to mobilize. Not under orders from Earth. Not waiting for approval from the Council. They simply decided. The Galactic Council was in chaos. Ambassador Tveen of the Sesic Coalition watched the human delegation with barely concealed horror. Humanity was still new to the stars. Young, unpredictable, emotionally volatile. Everyone knew the stories. How they had clawed their way off a death world. How they turned every challenge into a competition, every enemy into a lesson. But this was different. You cannot do this, Tveen hissed, his translucent skin flickering with agitation. The Ethlin situation is being handled through proper channels. Unilateral military action violates 17 treaties and... Children are dying, interrupted Captain Amara Okafor, Earth's chief military liaison. She stood at the podium, her uniform crisp, her expression unreadable. Right now. While we talk. The Kravix have sovereign. Sovereignty ends when you start murdering children. The chamber fell silent. Tveen's voice dropped to a whisper. If you do this, you will be at war with the Kravix. And the Council cannot protect you. Amara's smile didn't reach her eyes. We're not asking for protection. The first human fleet dropped out of warp 3 days later, deep in Ethlin territory. They found a Kravix raiding party in the middle of an attack. Transport ships loading terrified civilians while orbital platforms burned the surface below. The Kravix commander, confident in his empire's reputation, sent a single transmission. Turn back, humans. This does not concern you. The human response was equally brief. Wrong. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations. Human ships moved like a pack, coordinated, adaptive, ruthless. They didn't match the Kravix in firepower or armor. But they didn't need to. They used the debris field as cover, turned the enemy's formations against them, and struck with precision that bordered on surgical. When the battle ended, every Kravix ship was disabled or destroyed. Not a single human vessel was lost. And below, on the planet's surface, the Ethlan survivors watched the sky in stunned silence as human dropships descended, not to conquer but to evacuate. The message spread across the galaxy within hours. Humanity had arrived. And they were not here to debate. The Kravix Empire had ruled the Outer Rim for 3 centuries. They were not the largest power in the galaxy, not the most advanced. But they were feared, and fear, they had learned, was better than respect. Their fleets were brutal and efficient. Their soldiers were trained from birth. And their enemies always fell into one of 2 categories, subjugated or extinct. So when the first reports came in about the skirmish in Ethlan space, Supreme Commander Vraksh dismissed them entirely. Humans, the galaxy's newest species, barely a century into space travel. Primitive drives, laughable diplomacy, and an embarrassing obsession with emotional decision-making. They were children playing at war. Vraksh would teach them what real war looked like. He assembled a proper battle group. 23 warships, including 2 dreadnoughts, each one the size of a small moon. Enough firepower to glass a planet. Enough soldiers to occupy a system. The fleet moved into the Ethlan territory with absolute confidence, their scanners sweeping for the scattered human vessels that had dared interfere. They found them. A single human fleet. 16 ships. No dreadnoughts. No planetary siege platforms. Just midweight cruisers and frigates, holding position near the 4th planet, an Ethlan refugee world still evacuating civilians. Vraksh allowed himself a thin smile as he opened the channel. Humans, he said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of conquest. You have made a grave error. Withdraw now and we will consider your ignorance. Remain and you will learn why the Kravix do not forgive. The reply came almost immediately. A human voice. Come. Almost polite. Noted. Respectfully, no. Vraksh's crest flared red. Then you will die. Probably eventually, the human replied. But not today. The Kravix fleet advanced in formation, a textbook hammer and anvil designed to crush and overwhelm. Dreadnoughts at the center, cruisers flanking, strike craft deploying in waves. It was a tactic that had won 1,000 battles. The humans scattered. Not in panic. Not in retreat. But with purpose, each ship breaking formation and accelerating in seemingly random directions. Vraksh's tactical officer looked confused. They're running? No, Vraksh said slowly, watching the tactical display. There. And then the humans turned. All at once. Perfectly synchronized. Like a flock of birds reacting to a predator. Suddenly, the Kravix formation wasn't encircling prey, it was spread thin, exposed, vulnerable. Human ships dove through the gaps, firing as they passed, then breaking away before return fire could track them. They weren't fighting like an army. They were fighting like hunters. The first dreadnought died 12 minutes into the battle. It didn't explode in some glorious fireball. It simply stopped. Human missiles, smaller, faster, smarter than anything the Kravix had seen, swarmed its point defense systems, overwhelming them through sheer adaptive persistence. Then the railgun strikes came. Precise. Surgical. Targeting the reactor shielding with terrifying accuracy. The dreadnought went dark, drifting dead in space. Vraksh stared at the display in disbelief. How? They're not engaging our strengths, his tactical officer whispered. They're exploiting our weaknesses. The second dreadnought tried to compensate. It pulled back, tightened its escort screen, focused all power on shields. The humans ignored it. Instead, they tore through the cruiser line like a blade through cloth. Every pass, another ship disabled. Every engagement, another Kravix captain forced to choose between pursuit and survival. And then Vraksh understood. The humans weren't trying to destroy his fleet. They were teaching him. By the time the battle ended, the Kravix had lost 9 ships outright and another 6 were crippled beyond repair. The 2 dreadnoughts, pride of the Empire, floated uselessly, their crews trapped inside. The human fleet regrouped near the planet. Not a single ship had been destroyed. Vraksh sat in his command chair, his claws digging into the armrests. Around him, his bridge crew worked in stunned silence. The communication channel opened again. The same human voice. Supreme Commander Vraksh, you're being allowed to retreat. Take your surviving ships and leave Ethlin space. Spread the word. These people are under our protection now. Vraksh's voice was a rasp. This is not over. No, the human agreed. It's not. But it will be. You just don't know it yet. The channel closed. The retreat was humiliating. The surviving Kravik ships limped back toward their territory, leaving behind wreckage and pride in equal measure. But Vraksh was not a fool. He had been a warrior for 60 years. He recognized a superior enemy when he saw one. He sent a priority message to the Kravik's high command, bypassing protocol and pride. Do not underestimate the humans. They do not fight like the council species. They do not fight for territory or resources. They fight like we do, but smarter, faster, and without fear. The response came within the hour. Then we will crush them with numbers. Assemble the Grand Fleet. Vraksh closed his eyes. They still didn't understand. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the news spread like radiation from a dying star. Humanity had defeated a Kravik's battle group. Not through luck. Not through overwhelming force. But through strategy, adaptation, and a kind of cold, relentless competence that made even the Council's oldest species uneasy. Ambassador Tveen watched the footage in his private chambers, his skin shifting through a dozen colors of distress. What have we let into the stars? He whispered. But on 100 Ethlin worlds, in shelters and refugee camps, the survivors watched the same footage and felt something they hadn't felt in months. Hope. And in human space the fleets continued to mobilize. Not because Earth commanded it, but because humanity had decided. The Kraviks wanted a war? They would get a lesson instead. The Kravik's Grand Fleet had not been assembled in over 70 years. It was a weapon of last resort. A monument to imperial power. Over 200 warships, drawn from every corner of Kravik space. Dreadnoughts, carriers, siege platforms, and enough firepower to reduce a star system to ash. When it moved, entire sectors fell silent. High Chancellor Dravik stood on the observation deck of the flagship Eternal Dominion, watching the fleet stretch out before him like a storm made of steel. He was old now, his crest faded to pale gray, but his eyes still burned with the certainty of conquest. This, he said to his assembled commanders, is what happens when primitives forget their place. The plan was simple. Overwhelming force. Total annihilation. They would jump directly into human-controlled Ethlin space, destroy every human ship in orbit and glass 3 Ethlin worlds as an example. The humans would learn. The galaxy would remember. The Kraviks did not forgive. But 3 days before the Grand Fleet's planned assault, something unexpected happened. A single human ship dropped out of warp at the edge of Kravik's territory. A small frigate, barely armed, broadcasting on all channels. The message was addressed to High Chancellor Dravik personally. "We know you're coming," the human captain said. Her voice was steady, almost conversational. "We know your fleet composition, your staging point, your planned jump coordinates. We've seen your strategy before. Shock and awe, overwhelming numbers. It's worked for you in the past." Dravik's crest flushed crimson. "Destroy that ship." "Wait," his intelligence officer said, listening. "She's still talking." The human continued. "We're giving you one chance. Turn your fleet around. Leave Ethlin space. We'll consider the matter settled." Dravik laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "And if we refuse?" The silence stretched for 3 seconds. "Then we'll teach you why humans don't build empires." The transmission ended. The human frigate jumped away before the Kraviks could even target it. Dravik turned to his fleet commander. "Accelerate the timeline. We launch in 6 hours." The Grand Fleet emerged from warp in perfect formation, ready to unleash devastation. They found nothing. Empty space. No human ships. No orbital defenses. Just the silent Ethlin refugee worlds below, their populations already evacuated. Dravik's tactical officer scanned frantically. "Where are they?" "Irrelevant," Dravik snapped. "If the humans are too cowardly to face us, we proceed with planetary bombardment." "Prepare." "Contact," the sensor officer shouted. "Multiple signatures. They're behind us." The tactical display erupted with red markers. Somehow, impossibly, the human fleet had positioned itself between the Grand Fleet and their own supply lines. 30 ships, tiny compared to the Kravik's armada, but placed with surgical precision. Dravik stared at the display. How did they? They knew our jump coordinates, his intelligence officer whispered. They told us they knew. And then the humans opened fire. But they didn't attack the fleet. They attacked the logistics train. Supply ships. Fuel tankers. Ammunition carriers. The unglamorous, vulnerable backbone of any military operation. The human missiles were precise, terrifyingly accurate, and they struck with ruthless efficiency. In the first 90 seconds, the Grand Fleet lost a third of its operational range. Dravik's face went pale. All ships, turn and engage. Crush them. The Grand Fleet began its ponderous turn. Over 200 warships trying to reorient toward an enemy that refused to stay still. The humans scattered again. Not randomly. Not in panic. But according to a plan so precise it seemed almost choreographed. They split into wolf packs, each group targeting a different section of the fleet, hitting and running, never staying in range long enough for the Kravix' superior firepower to matter. And then the second wave arrived. 50 more human ships dropped out of warp, not warships but converted civilian vessels. Freighters. Mining ships. Colony transports. Each one loaded with drones, missiles, and a crew willing to risk everything. The Kravix laughed at first. Civilians? Merchants playing at war? Then the freighters deployed their cargo. Thousands of autonomous drones, cheap, expendable, and smart. They swarmed the Kravix point defenses, overwhelming sensors, jamming communications, creating chaos. The drones weren't meant to destroy. They were meant to distract. While the Grand Fleet swatted at gnats, the real human warships struck at the joints. Command ships. Coordination hubs. Flagship communication arrays. One by one, the Kravix's ability to operate as a unified fleet began to crumble. 6 hours into the battle, Dravik realized the truth. The humans weren't trying to destroy the Grand Fleet. They were trying to strand it. Without supply lines, the fleet couldn't sustain prolonged operations. Without fuel, they couldn't jump home. Without coordination, they were just 200 isolated ships, each one fighting alone. And the humans, these supposedly primitive, emotional, reckless humans, had turned the galaxy's most feared armada into a liability. Fall back, Dravik rasped. Emergency jump. Now. We don't have enough fuel for a coordinated. Now. The Grand Fleet retreated in chaos. Ships jumping individually, some abandoning damaged vessels, others running on emergency reserves. Of the 200 ships that had entered the battle, fewer than half made it back to Kravik space. And not a single human ship was destroyed. The footage spread across the galaxy within hours. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session, but no one knew what to say. The humans had done the impossible. They had broken the Kravix without even trying to fight them head-on. Ambassador Tveen sat in the empty council chamber long after the session ended, staring at the tactical replays. They didn't win through strength, he murmured. They won through understanding. Humans had studied their enemy, learned their patterns, identified their weaknesses, and then exploited them without hesitation. On Earth, in the dim briefing room of Human Fleet Command, Admiral Chen reviewed the casualty reports. 18 dead. 43 wounded. 3 ships heavily damaged. Across from her, Captain Okafor stood silently. The Kravix will come again, Chen said quietly. I know. And next time they'll be smarter. Okafor's expression didn't change. So will we. And in the ruins of the Grand Fleet, High Chancellor Dravik sat alone in his chambers, staring at a message that had just arrived. It was from the humans. 4 words. We tried to warn you.